I am proposing that the worst one was Rocky 2. I'm going to explain why. Yeah, and I would say, unequivocally, like I stand by this. It is the worst of the Rockies.
Okay. Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Is it the worst in relation to the first one, or worst as a film?
That's a great question.
Yes, it is.
I think it's both. I think it's both. I think the major sins of the movie are in relation to the first one. No, Frankenstein is just okay. He just passes by. Sometimes he just wants to say things. So I'll start with that. That's a good question, because I'll start with the fact that it is a ludicrous remake of the first one. That's what it is.
Yeah.
It's a ridiculous remake of the first one, where nothing is realistic, where it is sequelitis is dripping from the movie, to the point where they have the characters doing things that are diagnosably insane to try and harken back to the original. For example, let's start with the most ridiculous part, which is that he won in the end.
Right.
Now, Apollo Creed had something to prove in this one, right? The whole first one is based off of the idea that Apollo Creed wasn't really training for the fight. Is that right?
Yes.
Right. This one, he had something to prove. The heavyweight champion of the world, the way they hyped him up, the greatest heavyweight of all time, had something to prove against Rocky Balboa. Right? Watch the first one and you'll know what that means. The Italian stallion, right? So that's, of course, the most ludicrous part of it, that Rocky wins in the end. But then there's the sequelitis issues. Which is, the guy in the beginning when he says, "I'll just call you," and he says, "I'll just go, hey, yo." Remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah, you remember that in the first one? That was charming.
Yeah.
Where, Adrian says, he's call Rocky, and he,
Yeah.
Right, he opens
That was
windows and says,
great.
yeah, that was charming, right? He was, this is just something he did on the moment. In the second one, having him do it to that guy and this lawyer in the outside the hospital makes it seem like Rocky has a catchphrase, like he's a cartoon, right? I mean, so that's the first. Oh, and they repeatedly harken back to things like that throughout the movie. So that's that. There's also, if you watch 70s movies from the time, they were the really bad ones were trying to be gritty because that's what was so big at the time. Godfather was one of the biggest ones, and Martin Scorsese got big at that time. And the first one is actually an incredibly gritty movie. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. But when you watch the ones that were trying to be gritty, that had no ability to be gritty and no insight, no inspiration, they were just dreadfully boring, right? And that's what we were watching with that. When you go back and watch it, it's an incredibly boring movie. It's melodramatic. That's the difference, right? When drama is based off of, when something's actually dramatic, there's actual stakes that you understand at play, right? That something's melodramatic when you don't even understand what the stakes are. The stakes seem ludicrous, right? And so that's when you move into melodrama, and that's what the movie was. It was he learns to read by reading to his comatose wife after they had their child. This is something that belongs in a soap opera, not in a Rocky movie, not in a movie that claims to be hardcore in any way.
Right.
So that's what it's a boring movie. The second thing that I noticed is it's when he started to fight for the wrong reasons for the first time. When you watch the first one, he fought for his human dignity. Is basically what he was fighting for. Is that right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. What everyone wants is their voice to be heard, even in the smallest way. They want to know they exist. In the second one is when they start to pull on what became the macho feeling of the 80s, which I'm not judging that one way or the other, but in that movie, when he's trying to be gritty, it had a very strange feeling to it. So, he's fighting because Apollo Creed's trying to humiliate him. He could lose his eye, he could get killed, his wife doesn't want him to do it, but why is he doing it? Right? They throw in this thing that he needs a job, but it seemed like throw in, to me, Right? I'm making a claim for myself. I'm not saying this is an absolute fact because that can be right. Because I don't know what Stallone was thinking when he wrote the damn thing.
Yeah.
And I mean that on lots of levels. I don't know what he's thinking when he wrote the damn thing. So when you think about that, and you think about, he's looking at that paper. We all remember the scene where he's looking at the paper, and he's, chicken. What is it? Italian chicken?
Yeah. He's looking at the flyer that they put out to try and draw him out. Yeah.
Right. It starts to become about his ego, where it starts to move into, instead of about pride, it becomes ego, which are two different things. Right. So those are the major reasons, and I'll give you, I'm trying to think of a small example of, like in the first one, it was very charming, and it showed where his character was going when he came home with the meat. You remember this?
Yes.
Right. And he gave it to her and just told her to cook it, and he wasn't being very supportive or understanding the way she was feeling. And then they had that wonderful close-up of just him thinking and realizing what kind of person did he want to be, what kind of husband did he want to be. And he's making that decision right then and there. They didn't have those moments in the movie. Again, drama versus melodrama. They just had just wild, ridiculous behavior. The only one I felt that was living in the real world anymore was Adrian's character, and that, of course, the incongruence of that and everybody else being it was very strange.
Yeah.
So that's basically the biggest reason why I would say that, yeah, it was the worst movie.